Greetings and welcome back to Room 303 and our Talks with Walt, as we are calling our readings through the deathbed edition of Walt Whitman's Leaves of Grass. We turn now to the poem, The Sleepers. All 8 sections of it, we're going to try and take it in one complete lecture because I think it deserves that. One of the most, many argue, one of the most controversial poems of Leaves of Grass. Certainly some have argued one of the most difficult poems of Leaves of Grass. I think that this poem is in many ways going to repay study, especially when we consider its original version in 1855. Now this is fascinating. Think of this. Here, near the end, with basically 150 poems left in Leaves of Grass, we are studying now a poem that was actually part of the original version of Leaves of Grass. Why would Whitman put it right here, right now? Well, I think there's a few arguments to be made for that, but I think that the primary way that I have argued that one should read Leaves of Grass is as a dance. Now there's going to be a word in this poem, antipodes. It's only used one other time, Broadway Pageant 2, in all Leaves of Grass. I think when people ask me to reduce all of Leaves of Grass down to one word, it's hard to do. I mean, you could do curious, you could do learning, obviously you could do soul, you could do leaves. I mean, you could use the word come, which is that introductory word. Actually, for me, antipodes is the word, though. And it sits in this poem in a perfect spot, in Leaves of Grass in a perfect spot. I think you can read Leaves of Grass this way. I think Whitman spends the first part of his life trying to come to terms with the pain, suffering of the world and his life. We call that a theodicy. And I think his theodicy is more prescient because of the years that he spent in the war. Because obviously he's got to ask the question, why in heaven's name are we going through this horrific experience? And as we've said many times, this question of theodicy, as we've studied in our study of Milton and obviously elsewhere, is the question of how can you explain the terrible things in this world that are happening when somehow we're supposed to believe in an all-powerful, all-living deity, as we've commented, of course, in Milton's Paradise Lost. We've given full lectures at learnstrong.net. I think what Whitman does is in the first part of his life, he invents or comes to his theodicy. And we've reduced it down to a simple line. When bad things happen, no longer ask, why did this happen to me, but rather, why did this happen for me? Or if we're talking about the collection, why did this not happen to us, but why did this happen for us? And I think the first part of Leaves of Grass, right up and including Passage to India, is Whitman coming to terms with that, can we call it a code? A theodicic code, that idea. Let's try and see pain, suffering as propaedeutic, instructional. But then, Prayer of Columbus, and then Sleepers, and then all of the basically 150 poems that follow. I think Whitman's trying to figure out the next part of his life, and it's this. How do I live my theodicy in my old age? Now, guys, you're all young, so you just got to take this from an old fart. When I tell you, it's pretty easy, I say easy. It's relatively easy to invent a code that you think you can live by when you're young. Why? Because you're young, you're energetic, I mean, and you have lots of passion, you have lots of energy. The question, of course, becomes what happens when you turn into an old person? Now, when that happens is obviously up to you, and it's circumstantial. I've already commented when we did Columbus that 1873 was a tough year for Whitman. I mean, the paralytic stroke and all the other stuff, people dying in his life. He had a lot of problems. And you'll see this as we begin now, our declension, our ending of Leaves of Grass. There's going to be a lot of pain in his life as he gets older. And why is that? Well, as Yeats will say it in that classic poem, Sailing to Byzantium, that is no country for old men, the young in one another's arms. That's what runs the world. Of course, really the young, you guys, are just birds in the trees, those dying generations at their song. Later he'll say an aged man is but a paltry thing. That is to say, easy to corrupt, easy to ruin, and obviously both physically and spiritually. And I think Whitman was acutely aware of that. Although he wrote this poem very early in his career, I think Whitman is trying to come to terms with antipodes, opposites. Think of your yin-yang symbol, and at 3A we're gonna highlight Lao Tzu's Tao Te Ching, which is a wonderful companion read for Leaves of Grass all the way through, but certainly for a poem like this. This is without doubt, one of the greatest poems I think that's ever been written. Certainly one of the greatest poems in Leaves of Grass. It is going to reward our study, and I'm hopeful that you'll enjoy it now with us. Now, our assumptions are that you've been with us at LearnStrong.net, down that left-hand side, Talks with Walt, our playlist, from the very beginning. The very first word, come, that invitation word, through all of the introspection poems, including Eidolons, which will come back to play here. Of course, we just finished, as we said, with Prayer of Columbus, and I think it's important for us to pay attention to that. Now, our Nortons, as we always will turn to Nortons, will tell us a number of things about this poem that we'll want to pay attention to. This was the fourth of the untitled 12 of the first edition in Leaves of Grass. The poem was called Night Poem in 1856, Sleep Chasings in 1860-67, and The Sleepers since 1871. It's undergone much revision, underline the word much, particularly in the withdrawal of difficult but interesting passages, not so much for aesthetic as for discretionary reasons. This is a controversial poem. Okay, we're going to see it before the 10 lines are over when we get into the poem. But this poem has a lot more controversy associated with it in the very original form. Now, we're not going to spend a lot of time with that. I'll let you guys run that to ground on your own. And of all, now back to Norton's, of all of Whitman's poems, it may be said that this one most repays study of the first 1855 text. We said the same, obviously, about passages from Song of Myself, the other obviously important offering in the original 55 version. It's a powerful, now Norton's, it's a powerful and original composition, one of the poet's most imaginative, and also one of the most esoteric. It's perhaps the only surrealist American poem of the 19th century, remarkable in its anticipation of later experiment. Burke, Whitman's first official biographer and professional student of the mind, was able in 1883 to characterize the Sleepers accurately as, quote, a representation of the mind during sleep of connected, half-connected, and disconnected thoughts and feelings as they occur in dreams, some commonplace, some weird, some voluptuous, and all given with the true and strange emotional accompaniments that belong to them. Sometimes, and these are the most astonishing parts of the poem, the vague emotions without thought that occasionally arise in sleep are given as they actually occur apart from any idea, the words having in the intellectual sense no meaning, but arousing, as music does, the state of feeling intended, end quote. John Burroughs, on the other hand, confessed that he could not understand the poem, and he spoke for many. Perhaps the poet himself could not have explicated certain aspects of his vision, but the main theme is unmistakable and moving. In the world of night, the poet is both the dreamer and participant in the dreams of others. He identifies his consciousness with theirs, the whole experience becoming essentially one in which the darkness, symbolic of spiritual fulfillment, is an agent of invigoration and renewal. The penetration, the audacity of metaphor, we're going to get to it, the psychological insight of this poem with its engagement of sexual fantasy, we're going to get to it, was unmatched in its time and challenges the best achievements in this kind of hours. And I think we're gonna find this to be the case as we pick up the poem in all 8 sections and read through them. Now, why is the poem placed here? Well, as I said, I think we're moving from light, as in Passage to India, to now the darkness, as in Columbus, and now Sleepers, and then on we go. And as I've kind of gestured as we've headed into that now, this lecture, I think that Whitman is trying to deal with Beowulf 3. Stay with me for a moment. We've given full lectures on this at LearnStrong.net. The great epic poem, the Anglo-Saxon epic poem Beowulf, is of course a poem where Beowulf the hero will fight against 3 monsters. Of course, the first one, Grendel, and then Grendel's mother. These are going to get progressively more demanding monsters to fight against, but it's that third monster, it's that dragon, it's the dragon of death, which Beowulf can't win. All he can do is die gracefully. He can defeat it, notice, only with the help of Wycliffe. He's got to have the young to help him do it, as we've commented many times on our lectures. But I think what Whitman is doing is trying to come to terms with this third monster, this dragon. How do you deal with that? And Antipodes is the answer. You got to embrace the fact that there's all these bizarre opposites and paradoxes in the world. Life, death, and so on and so forth. And obviously we're going to play that game out as we work with this poem. Now I wish I could just read the entire poem aloud to you, because it rewards reading aloud. And there are passages here that are just mind-blowing. But we're going to have to work line by line, word by word, so let's jump into it and see how well we do. Now, just to remind, Sleepers was used in spontaneous me. You'll remember 2 sleepers at night lying close. But the word sleepers only used actually 4 times in this poem, which I find kind of amazing. We'll begin with a set of 5 lines that are quite compelling. I wander all night in my vision, stepping with light feet, swiftly and noiselessly stepping and stopping, bending with open eyes over the shut eyes of sleepers, wandering and confused, lost to myself, ill-sorted, contradictory, pausing, gazing, bending, and stopping. Notice that we'll begin with wander. And interestingly, it immediately takes us to the Odyssey, Homer's Odyssey. It takes us back to Song of Myself 10, wandering, amazed at my own lightness and glee. And you'll remember that Wordsworth in 1807 had made famous, I wandered lonely as a cloud. All of that is subsumed in this very first word. I wandered all night, and then of course in my vision. And if you'll think about it, vision can here mean dream, but it can also mean a goal. And you can think about this line as being characteristic of what he's done in Leaves of Grass. For those of you who have read from the very first word all the way up to now, you'll appreciate what I'm about to say. All of Leaves of Grass and engaging with Leaves of Grass is a journey. It's a wandering. It's a wandering through all of these different kinds of ideas that bring us now to stepping with light feet. Obviously, we'll play the game again from Song of Myself 10, wandering, amazed at my own lightness and glee. I think Whitman's having a lot of fun as he is compiling these poems, as I've said. Of course, the idea of light versus darkness and the notion that both of them are polarities that are necessary and to be celebrated. Of course, stepping takes us to Song of the Open Road, no doubt. Swiftly and noiselessly, later we're going to hear Noiseless Patient Spider, 13 poems away, I mean, for those of you who are counting. Stepping and stopping, bending will take us to Song of Myself 11, with open eyes over the shut eyes of sleepers. And this is kind of freaky. I mean, this freaks out some people right away. It's as if Whitman is hovering over you. As we've said when we did Brooklyn Ferry, for example, there is Whitman looking back at you from these pages saying, yo, what do I look like down here? I wonder what I feel like. Years from now, as you're touching me, what do I feel like? It's kind of like, whoa, that's kind of weird. The intimacy of this poem is as well immediately unsettling. And then notice, we again, wandering and confused. I find that a fascinating word. It matches with his word curious. Lost to myself takes us back to Song of Myself. Ill-sorted is an interesting phrase, and it's already setting us up for some of these antipodes, some of these opposites. Contradictory, of course. Pausing, gazing, bending back to the word, and stopping. But only stopping for a brief moment, which will take us to the last lines of Song of Myself 52. Some have seen this poem as the great summation of everything that came before, of the great poems. And many have argued this is the last great poem in Leaves of Grass. I've already made the argument. I don't think you can just look past all of the last 150 or so poems of Leaves of Grass and call them, what Harold Bloom called them, a waste of time. But I certainly do feel like Sleepers is in some ways a bookend to all of the project that's been coming. And then now, to move quickly, and we're going to find ourselves already in some major controversy before the end of the 10th line. How solemn they look, these sleepers, stretched and still. I've told you guys about his use of that word. How quiet they breathe, the little children in their cradles. And think about the power of that, because he's going to talk about a lot of old people, and yet he'll see them as little children. Well, of course, in the history of the world, and the globe, and the universe, then all of us are little children. And of course, it makes us think about Song of Myself 6 and the child. Of course, when you see the word cradles, you can't help but think about the cradle endlessly rocking. And now we're going to begin to get some of the cataloging that made the 1855 edition so powerful of Leaves of Grass. All the cataloging, we're going to get some of that. But notice the antipodes. Notice he's going to pull these catalogs from radically different places, and it will be radical. The wretched forms of ennuyés, that is to say, people that are so unbelievably bored, takes us obviously back to our Dante. The white features of corpses, we've seen corpses obviously all the way through Leaves of Grass. The livid faces of drunkards, the sick gray faces of onists. Now, this is the only use. We're going to see it one other time later in the poem. I'll let you run down what we're talking about here in terms of autoeroticism. But can we just say out loud, for 1855 and now, of course, at the Deathbed Edition, is a radical thing for Whitman's audience to have some conversation about types of eroticism or masturbation, onus, as it's related in this set of lines in Leaves of Grass at that time. I mean, I get it. Today, it ain't that big of a deal. But back when it was published, made this poem immediately very controversial. By the way, if you need to run that to ground, the Genesis 38, 9, 10 passage will help you there. The gashed bodies on battlefields takes us to drum taps. The insane in their strong-doored rooms. Of course, Whitman knew something of this and the insanity. Again, we talked about it early in the biography information of Whitman. The sacred idiots, we're going to get divine and sacred in this poem dancing. The newborn emerging from gates and the dying emerging from gates. It's an amazing thing to think about. Again, if you own your own copy, I recommend that you write the yin-yang symbol right next to all of these antipodes, these opposites, and the way he plays with them. The night pervades them and enfolds them. I told you guys about his hugging metaphor. The married couple, and now we're just going to begin to kind of play. It's almost like he's taking us on a video journey where he's just kind of dropping down inside of people's rooms while they're sleeping or wherever they're sleeping, often not in rooms. And he'll just show us a little bit of them, and it just is so compelling to see it. Watch how he plays the game. The married couple sleep calmly in their bed, he with his palm on the hip of the wife. I told you about the hips. Song of Myself 5 and, of course, Song of Myself 46. And she with her palm on the hip of the husband. Amazing eye, right? The sisters sleep lovingly side by side in their bed. The men sleep lovingly side by side in their beds. Think of the opening scene, of course, of Melville's Moby Dick. And the father sleeps with her little child, and the mother sleeps with her little child, carefully wrapped. We're second now already, talking about children. The blind sleep, the deaf and dumb sleep, the prisoner sleeps well in the prison. The runaway son sleeps. We think of the prodigal son that comes to mind. The murderer that is to be hung next day. And then this just sets there. How does he sleep? And the murdered person. And then again, how does he sleep? The goal in Leaves of Grass has always been perspicacity. To see all sides. All sides. As we have said, look at a quarter. No, there's not two sides. Of course there's a heads and a tail, but there's also the edge. That is a side. And then of course there's all of the sides within the little grooves of a quarter. And then of course there's an inside and an outside, and an upside and a downside. And of course there's values that have to be placed, and there's all kinds of sides to that. In other words, there isn't two sides, but there's always going to be the growing need for a larger perspective, and that's the game we're playing here. The female, again, back again to another stanza. The female that loves unrequited sleeps. The male that loves unrequited sleeps. We've heard about this already in Leaves of Grass. The head of the moneymaker that plotted all day sleeps. It's not clear whether the word plotted here is positive or negative. You can decide. The enraged and treacherous dispositions, all, and then he stacks his phrase, all sleep. And then he comes back to himself. I stand in the dark with drooping eyes. You'll remember this from Song of Myself 5. Lots of allusions already to Song of Myself, and especially to 5. 2 already, right? By the worst suffering, again we're back to the theodicy question, and the most restless, I pass my hands soothingly to and fro a few inches from them. The restless sink in their beds, they fitfully sleep. And now the use of the word now. Watch how it becomes all the way through this poem. Now, I pierce the darkness. It's interesting his use of the word restless. You'll remember it from Blue Ontario Shore number 9. I to pierce the deepest deeps is the way he plays the game then in Blue Ontario with Pierce. This idea of piercing and restlessness, movement. Now I pierce the darkness. New beings appear. The earth recedes from me into the night. I saw, interesting, I saw, not I see. I saw that it was beautiful. We're back to Genesis 1. God saw it, it was good. And I saw that what is not the earth is beautiful. In other words, again, back to Antipodes. I go from bedside to bedside. I sleep. Now he's identifying, of course, with the sleepers. Close with the other sleepers, each in turn. I dream in my dream all the dreams of the other dreamers. It's an amazing line. Some have said it's the line of Leaves of Grass. There it is. That is what Whitman is trying to do. I dream in my dream all the dreams of the other dreamers. From Plato through Emerson, all the way up through, including the Transcendental Movement. Whitman is trying to capture all the dreams. And I, he says, become the other dreamers. To me, these are the key lines in many ways of Leaves of Grass. That is to say, artists always try to identify with the all, right? All, as he said it. Notice he continues, I am a dance, right? It's interesting the way he uses this I am construction. We've said already the Exodus 3:14 passage from the biblical passage with I am. We'll see it all the way through this poem. I am a dance. Play up there. It's interesting. It's almost like now he's talking to you. Hey, enjoy the play with me. You guys reading it up there. Play with me up there. The fit is whirling me fast. Now, we've seen this word whirling all the way through Leaves of Grass, and the imagery of spinning, it will be significant. I think it's important that I started our conversation with Yeats' Sailing to Byzantium. O sages standing in God's holy fires in a gold mosaic of a wall, come from the holy fire. turn in a gyre. Remember that gyre imagery? I think Yeats learned a lot from Whitman, and especially we'll see it in that Byzantium poem. This idea of whirling me fast. I am, and now we're back to it, I am the ever laughing. And the use of laughing is important. It is new moon and twilight. I see the hiding of dossiers. That is to say, now Whitman, our Norton's will give us a couple of insights here. Back to the Pierce line, Norton's will tell us, with this line, the poet's vision deepens. He not only dreams, but also experiences the dreams of the other dreamers with whom he identifies. Dossiers is the French plural form of delight or sweetness. Here, delight. And from this line to the end of the passage, line 41, Norton's will remind us, the poet subtly suggests the pleasures of erotic participation. And yeah, we're going to get to some of the more controversial lines here. I see nimble ghosts, taking us back to Song of Broad Acts 8. Whichever way, look, cash and cash, again, the French word for hiding places, in the ground and sea, and where it is neither ground nor sea. In other words, I'm going to seek out everything. Some have argued that the voice that Whitman is trying to play with is the voice of the Logos of John 1, that sees all, knows all, understands all, and is trying to share all. Well, do they do their jobs, those journeymen divine, back to sacred? Only from me can they hide nothing, and would not if they could. I reckon, back to Song of Myself 20 and 49 with this use of I reckon, I am their boss, and they make me a pet besides, and surround me, and lead me, and run ahead when I walk. This wonderful imagery. To lift their cunning covers to signify me with stretched hands and resume the way. By the way, this use of the word cunning, Norton's points out, used here in the sense of the Germanic root knowing or possessed of ability. Note that the covered ones signify, make signs to the speakers. Onward we move, a gay gang of blackguards, with mirth, shouting, music, and wild flapping pennants of joy. Of course, I Hear America Singing comes to mind. I am the actor, the actress, the voter, the politician. It's interesting that he goes from actor and acting to then voting and political. Notice there's four. The